This is the Contagious Faith Podcast.
Welcome to the Contagious Faith Podcast, where we bring you real stories, bold leaders, and challenging questions for global revival. I'm your host, Gabriel Jackson. Let's go. All right, Becky, how you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. How are you?
I'm excellent. It's so good to have you on the show. For our listeners, this is going to be a special episode. This is Becky Murray. She's the founder. She's the CEO of One by One, which also has the Dignity Project connected. We're going to learn all about these things. Also, embrace the journey. You've written a book. There's the host. You're hosting some things on TV in UK. Like, there's some really exciting things happening, and but it's an honor to have you, Becky, and just to learn about your journey. And I think for those that are going to listen to this, you're dealing with a topic in society that often it's messy, it's dark, it's intense, and you have been brave enough, right, to say yes. And I know you're crazy enough. Exactly. So I'm so excited to have you on and then hear about the journey. Where maybe for those that aren't familiar with One by One, what's the ministry? What are you guys focused on?
So we help to rescue children out of slavery, and our heart is to end exploitation. So our two major passions are prevention, because if we can stop children from being exploited in the first place, that has to be the best win of all. But then secondly, we have several protection centers. So we've got sites in Kenya, a safe house in Pakistan, and then a crisis shelter in Uganda for little girls rescued out of trafficking specifically.
Wow. So when you say slavery, can you kind of unpack that a little bit? Like, what does that include? Because I think there's a connotation for certain people on what that means, and they may not fully understand, I think, what the full scope of it. Absolutely.
Well, it's estimated that there's over 50 million trapped in modern day slavery today, which is just outrageous. But modern slavery takes on many different forms. So human trafficking is the one that's like the most common term used. So that can be referring to children trapped in sex trafficking, little girls in brothels, things like that. It can refer to bonded labor, to domestic servitude, or to forced labor. And so they're the common types that we're working in. Okay.
And this is, I was reading a little bit about your bio, and I think the origin of this, it's a powerful story, and I think probably will be eye-opening for people that are going to jump into this. I know for me, like in America, there's certain things that are just not, I don't have exposure to certain things. Sometimes I think Americans or people in the West in general, maybe Europe as well, are not fully aware of some of the things that are very common in other parts of the world. And so, we have like a vague idea. There's some weird stuff happening or dark stuff, but I don't know that we're entirely aware of the full scope of it. And you guys are on the front lines. And so, for those listening, this may be intense for you to hear, but I think some of the things that Becky will share, we need to know. And as Christians, I think it's so important that the body of Christ answers the call. Either you're going and serving and helping a ministry that does these things, or other, many great ministries, or you're someone that is funding these ministries, or you're actively praying and supporting what's happening. But the reality is, every believer, I believe, has a call and a duty as a follower of Christ to actually say yes to whatever God has for them, and to not just live their own life, build their own little kingdom, but to actually participate in the body of Christ, and collectively God wants to move and use us. So Becky, what does this look like for you? Like, where did this get started? How did this start? How did this passion start to end, trafficking and exploitation?
So as a young girl, I was always very passionate about injustice. In fact, to this day, I still am. And so as a young girl, I thought I would tackle injustice through the legal system. And so I had all these plans to go and study law, become a lawyer. But I was on a short-term missions trip when I was 18, and that's the first time I felt God speak to me directly. I'd been brought up in church my whole life, gave my heart to Christ when I was 9 years old. But it was on that missions trip that I, for the very first time, felt him speak really directly to me. It wasn't audible, but it was as clear as if it had been. And it was that I would do a work with vulnerable children. And so that kind of changed the trajectory of my life. And so my background actually now is pediatric nursing, just because I wanted to get a skill that might be useful around the world with vulnerable kids. Yeah. And so it was 2 decades ago. It was April 2006 that I went out on a short-term missions trip with my local church to Sierra Leone. And I met a little girl who lived on the streets. She was 9 years old. And her mum and dad had both passed away. So she would just beg on the streets in order to make it from day to day. And I simply noticed she had no shoes. It should have been just a really small gesture that, to be honest, I wouldn't have ever thought of since, except it ended up being a life-changing moment for me. So I bought this little girl a little pink pair of flip-flops to match the pink t-shirt she was wearing. And the flip-flops literally cost me the English equivalent of 50 pence, so 60, 70 cents at the most. But that evening, she'd asked the locals where the British team were staying, and they must have known the hotel. And the next minute, I'm stood outside the hotel because we were about to go on to this big gospel campaign. And I remember looking up and seeing her running towards me. She's got a huge smile on her face. I'm guessing because for the first time in her life, she's got shoes on her feet. And she approached me and she said, "Should I wait in the hotel?" So I said, "No, we're literally just leaving." And she again said, "Yes, but shouldn't I wait in your bedroom?" And I think if this 9-year-old girl had asked a man on the team that question, I would have understood the context of the question. Yeah. I was a young girl myself in my early 20s at the time, and I genuinely had no idea what she was referring to. So I asked her a third time, and sure enough, she thought that I spent 50 pence so that I could have sex with her. And in that moment, she put a face to a global problem. Up until then, it had been this big statistic. It was, an unknown, big global problem. But all of a sudden, looking at these little eyes, looking up at me, thinking that I deserve her body for 50 pence, it did something really deep. Wow. I remember looking at her, but actually having a conversation with God. And the conversation was this: I'm all in. No human should ever be bought or sold. But for a child to think that over such a tiny amount, God, I am all in. I don't know where to start. I don't know where to begin. But God, if you can use my life to even just help one, then it's worth it. Wow. And that's why we call the organization One by One. We've now have the honor of working with over 53,000 kids around the world. But it started right there 20 years ago on the streets of Sierra Leone with one little girl.
Wow, that's actually crazy that a child would think that, like, for it to be that normalized, right? Like, that is absolutely wild. I remember there's a story that I don't know if you're familiar with the Alpha course, Trinity Brompton and there in the UK, but there's a story that is told about this kid that's walking along the beach, and there's all these, I think these like starfish, right? And there's like hundreds or thousands or whatever of starfish all over the beach, and one by one, right, the kid is taking them and putting them back in the ocean. And there's a man, right, and the man says, what can you, like, what's the point, right? And all of that kind of like negative perspective. And the kid's tagline there is like, well, like, that one I just saved, it mattered to that one, exactly, and one by one at a time, like, and that's the thing. I think, Becky, there's issues in our world that seem so big. Yeah. And I think for a lot of Christians, we look at these things like for example, in my city, homelessness and fentanyl and drug use is kind of one of those mountains that just no one quite has the answer to, it seems. And it's so overwhelming, and we're looking at a problem and we're trying to step into it, and we're ministering in that, let's say, in that population of drug addicts or the homeless. And when we look at it as the whole, it seems so daunting, it seems so overwhelming. But when there's that moment where one person encounters the love of Jesus and is set free or is taken off the streets and given really, a new life or a second chance, it's those moments I'm like, wow, if all of heaven, as the book of Luke talks about, all of heaven rejoices when one sinner turns back to God. And I think it's just so precious. So what you're doing is so beautiful. And I think, so for those, because we're gonna dive a lot, there's a lot more to dive into. We're just scratching the surface, everybody. So stick with us. I think you're going to be massively inspired as we continue to kind of peel back some of the layers on this. But Becky, what would you say, like, just as a charge for those who maybe they are looking at a problem in the world and they feel that tug in their heart, but they haven't quite stepped into it yet? What would you say to them in this moment?
Just say yes. So I often feel like I'm holding a teaspoon in my hand and attempting to empty an ocean of need with a teaspoon. And there are moments where my heart is overwhelmed because the sheer need is huge. And the risk is sometimes, as humans, we can think, well, if I can't fix it all, I'll do nothing at all. But the reality is Jesus tells us, just love your neighbor. And sometimes that neighbor is quite literally next door to you, and sometimes they're across the world. But just say yes to what God's stirring in your heart, because on the other side of your yes are miracles and transformation that God wants to do, not just in you, but also through you. And so you have no idea where that yes will take you, because saying yes to buy a kid a pair of flip-flops 2 decades ago has now taken me all over the world, working with thousands of children around the world. Just say yes and let God do the rest.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Powerful. It's so interesting, because I believe, Becky, that even when you were a young girl, God was preparing you for this. Like, I've seen this in my life, I'll call it the providence of God, or just, I've seen it, how his hand has shaped me so actively. And all these things in my life have seemed a little random, and you sometimes we don't have the vision to see how the puzzle fits. But I believe God is so active in our life, and even putting in you this longing or this desire for justice, and really this righteous anger, indignation against injustice. Not everyone has that same prompting and same leaning about those things. And yet for you had that. And so it's like, when you had that moment, even though you're feeling like this is something new that I'm saying yes to this, and it's definitely a new trajectory for you. But I just believe God was so beautifully orchestrating, not in a weird puppet master way, but just that he had such a beautiful plan and path for you that we get to say yes to, or we can reject. I think that's where it's kind of intense when we think about, well, what if you had said no, or what if you had just sort of rejected it? And I think that far too often God wants to do something on our planet, and he's looking for those that will say yes and that will radically obey. And he is going to provide, he's going to make the way, he's going to shape us into the people that can actually steward and carry out these massive visions and plans that he has. So, it's just so beautiful. And what you said, for those listening, it's scary. It can be scary, but I believe even now you might feel your heart, you're feeling something inside because you know God has called you to something and you've been either running from it or you're just frightened. You don't know where to start. And so, Becky, when you have this experience as an 18-year-old, what happened next? I mean, what's sort of the evolution of that then leads you to now running a, multinational organization?
So 2009, I was given a plot of land in Kenya. And it was all exciting because I was given this field. It was incredible until the bills began to pile in from the architects and the builders. And I remember at this moment in time, we had £2,000 in One by One's account, and it had taken us months to raise this £2,000. And yet suddenly I'm given a bill for 150,000. It may as well have been for $1 million because I'm like, I have no idea how this is going to happen. And so I remember crying out to God and being like, well, Lord, you said this, you better sort this. And so I remember it was a mixture of some little faithful old ladies coming and giving me 10, 20 pounds here and there, saying, put that towards the work, and really faithful, beautiful people. And then some amazing, miraculous moments where we just so happened to meet a businessman at the perfect timing, and just miracle after miracle of his provision. And so we opened our first centre, which is based in Kenya, on the 12th of the 12th of the 12th. And from there, it's just began to grow. So it was being in Kenya for a few years, when all of a sudden 2 mums approached me asking for prayer because their kids had gone missing. And so I began to ask all the local schools to see, is this rare or is this common? And found out human trafficking was happening in the village where we were based. And so again, I wanted to speak to lots of locals to see if there was some sort of pattern or strategy. Was it a certain time of year? Was it a certain age child? Was it a certain gender? What were the common denominators in order to try and have a strategy really to resolve this problem?
Yeah.
And the common denominator that rose again and again from multiple schools was period poverty, which I'd never even heard of before. But basically it was where girls would start their monthly cycles, and as a result of that, they didn't have the products that we have in the West to be able to go to school. Also, you're dealing in areas where it's a real taboo subject, like there's a real shame attached to it. And so many girls were dropping out of school. Other girls would try unique things like grass or old rags, but that would actually lead to further infections and then missing even more school. And the traffickers were onto this. And so the traffickers would target these young girls with their wonderful job opportunities in the city. Come be a cook, a cleaner, a nanny, a model, whatever line they thought might work. And the vast majority of these girls were going willingly. It wasn't like they were forced off the street and kidnapped. They were going willingly, having been deceived. And so with that mindset, I was like, okay, well, let's get to them before the traffickers ever do. Let's stop them from ever going into this. And so we launched the Dignity Project in 2015. And it's where we go into schools, reaching young girls, equipping them with reusable sanitary products so that they can stay in school every week of the month. They don't expire after a month. They last several years. But we also equip it with training all around what is human trafficking, what are the tactics used in this area, so that we can safeguard them from falling into the same traps. And we started that thinking it was just for our little village in Kenya, but little did we know where God would take it. So we've now taken it into 14 countries across 5 continents, reaching more than 53,000 girls so far. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like we only did this because 2 mums asked for prayer for missing kids.
Oh my
gosh. But again, you never know where your yes will take you. Yeah. And that's the beauty of following Jesus, because what feels like a simple yes today could lead into something quite extraordinary tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, I love, what you're saying, Becky, because, a lot of times there are issues at play in society, and it's multifaceted and it's complex. And, what I find too is some organizations may just deal with sort of some of the spiritual side of things, and then some just the practical. And so the question is, how do we, what is God calling us to do? And I think some organizations, they're called to address maybe a very practical thing that is contributing, like what you're saying. There is a very clear pattern here that can be prevented, right? And that's what you guys are stepping into. When, as part of your program, like in Kenya, or to have land and to have buildings and things like that. So tell me more about the actual program. Let's say, are you guys bringing girls into something in a safe place, or what does the process look like fully?
Yeah. So the Dignity Project is our prevention work. So that's where we go across schools. We've taken it into refugee camps. And the beautiful part of it is we're able to say the reason no price can be put on you is because the highest price has been paid for you. And it's an incredibly, practical initiative, but it's a beautiful way of weaving in the gospel.
Wow.
And then in addition to that, we've got our safe houses. So, for example, the Mercy Centre, which is in Uganda, that one is specifically for little girls rescued out of human trafficking. So some of them have come from sex trafficking, others have come from forced labour, others from domestic servitude. And the levels of trauma vary. A lot of the time, even if they are in domestic servitude, they can still be assaulted physically and or sexually. And so a lot of the times you're dealing with kids who are experiencing significant trauma. And so they come into our Mercy Centre, where we've got counsellors and trauma therapists. We start every day with a morning devotion of, the answer to everything in life. But we see real breakthrough and healing start to take place. And then we give these girls tools long-term for the future, so that if they're triggered, once they go back to their village, here's how they deal with it, how they deal with anxiety and things like that. And then at the same time, we've got a team of social workers. So from the day a girl moves in, she's with us from anything from 3 up to a maximum of 6 months while we deal with any physical trauma and emotional trauma. But from the day she moves in, our social workers start working really hard on the exit. So that entails doing the family tracing, which can sometimes be very difficult. We have one little girl who was only 6. And so she didn't have a clue the name of the village she came from. Like, she'd just gone through so much. And so we give the social workers ample time to locate the family, do the family tracing. But then after that, find out, is this a safe family for the little girl to return to? In other words, were the family involved? Did they sell their child into slavery? In which case, we have to then look for foster families. But if they allowed their child to go into it out of ignorance, because sometimes traffickers will come to very poor areas and say, I can get a scholarship in the city for a great boarding school for your child to go to. In those circumstances, we'll work with the families and do a lot of education and prepare them so that once the child's ready to leave the Mercy Centre, she's back in a safe, loving family. And to watch the healing take place has just been incredibly beautiful to witness. Like, there's nothing more powerful than that. Wow. And watching a child go home, there's something deeply spiritual about that, in terms of rescued from the grip of the enemy, restored, redeemed, and then taken home. And there's a beautiful kind of dual parallel going on there in terms of what Christ has done for our lives.
Yeah, so true. I was going to ask, Becky, in this dynamic, what percentage of these cases involve family as the perpetrators of this versus, kind of like when I think of sex trafficking or some of these, I think sometimes of these like large, organizations almost that are behind these things. And I know that exists, some of those, the larger, but I do believe that there's a pretty high percentage that is just family related as well. What would you say in terms of percentages?
So for the 75 girls that have come through our centre in the last 12 months, a very high percentage of those were the family started it. But again, if that was due to ignorance, genuinely thinking they're sending their child for a better life, we can work with them as long as they're teachable. We can work with them and equip them. But sadly, there are a lot of narratives where family members were involved. And that's just the really heartbreaking side of society, because you just think it's bad enough that any human could put another human, let alone a child, through this. Yeah. But then when you know it's their father or their auntie, or, it's just, it's sickening.
Yeah. Hard to imagine at all.
It's brutal, really brutal to face. Yeah. And so we also do a lot of work in the community as well. So we've got outreach teams that do like community conversations where you're involving parents, you're involving local social services and all the different district leaders, because you want to bring the whole community in on this conversation in order to prevent and stop the flow of so many kids being trafficked in the world today. So that's a huge part of the work we do as well.
Yeah. Becky, is there something that you're noticing, like trends or culturally things that exist that you feel kind of makes this more socially acceptable in some of these places? Or is it not socially acceptable, but it's just happening because of poverty or other, a myriad of other just evil? I mean, what would you say there?
Sometimes in certain areas, there's almost, because it's gone on for years of, well, it's completely fine to have a 12-year-old cooking and cleaning in your house. That's absolutely fine, isn't it? And so you're dealing with generational issues in some of the countries we're working in. Yeah. And then, for example, in Pakistan, we're working in bonded labor. Yeah. So that's where children are born into, the one we're specifically working in is brick factories, but it can look like carpet weaving mills. It can look like tea plantations. But this is where it could be their parent, it could be a grandparent that took a loan from a brickmaster to pay for a dowry or a surgery. And then the deal is, okay, well, I'll give you a loan because you need the money today, it's urgent. But then you have to work for me to pay back the loan, which sounds legitimate, sounds reasonable. But what's not explained is that oftentimes the interest rates on those loans are greater than the daily wages. And also, so that not only does that person who took the loan have to work for the brickmaster, but their whole family do. Yeah. And when the initial person who originally took the loan, when they die, the debt's not written off, it's passed on to the next generation. And so I remember the first time I was walking through a brick factory in Pakistan, and I remember just being floored, because in a lot of modern day slavery, it's human trafficking where everything's covered up because everybody knows it's wrong. But the type of slavery I was seeing there was so blatant. It wasn't hidden. I was able to walk through this brick factory and meet men, women, and children trapped in slavery. I saw 3 and 4-year-olds who have to make a quota of bricks every day. And if they don't meet the quota, they won't eat that day. And that it starts from the age of 3 that these kids are put to work. And just seeing that just broke my heart in terms of how can we live in such an unjust world? Yeah. And what can we do to make a difference in it? Yeah.
Well, on this topic, especially in Pakistan, there's a ministry that we work with called Ananias International, and they're doing, a similar work specifically in Pakistan and among, bonded slaves. And I think there is such an ignorance. A lot of Christians don't understand that in these cases, in certain countries that are, let's say, Muslim dominated, that Christians are often persecuted, even in the education system, and in a lot of ways, Christians are often lower class, they're poor, they're illiterate, so they can't even really understand certain contracts that they are signing. And then here you go, and you have multi-generations, like you're saying, and this is such a honestly a grievous evil that this is allowed to exist. And we, I think what's so devastating about it when we look at these situations is they seem so big. But the question, even if you're listening today, it's like, look, there are for even a small amount of money, families can actually be rescued. But what's interesting about this is I've heard someone say, well, buying the freedom of these bonded slaves is just perpetuating the market for it. And it's not that that's necessarily factually wrong, but it's kind of like, so what? Should we just should we just be okay with it? Be like, well, we don't want to create a market for it. So
I actually 100% agree with that person. Like, we would never buy a child out of slavery, because that's causing two problems. Once you're putting money in a trafficker or brickmaster's hands, they're just going to go and buy more slaves with that. But secondly, what are you telling that individual? You're telling them that there's a price on their life. And what if one child was only $50 and the next child was $100? Is someone not as worthy? So we will never do that. So we work with families in order to bring children out of the brick kilns. And so the vast majority of children that we have are the ones that were very sickly and couldn't make many bricks to begin with. Kids who've got juvenile arthritis or breathing issues. Okay. But then because they're with us, it takes a lot of pressure off the family. They're able to pay back their own debt at a quicker rate. But then once they're all out, we then help set the families up with their own micro businesses so that they can stay out of slavery. So we've set some up with their own tuk-tuk taxi businesses and paid for them to have driving lessons so that they don't go back into exploitation again.
Interesting. Yeah, that's kind of another side angle of it is once someone is free of whatever situation, whatever form of exploitation, what is there to sustain a different path in a different way? So obviously the education and the care and the safe houses and all the things that you guys are doing. So yeah, it's really, it's really, really interesting, the different complexities here and different dynamics that are at play. I'm curious, Becky, with local governments, with things that you guys are dealing with, because again, you're dealing with community. I'm assuming you're dealing with government to a certain degree, officials and so on. Are you well received in these places, or is there a little bit of like, do you feel opposition? What do you sense?
It varies from place to place. So Pakistan, for example, it's already very problematic to be a Christian in Pakistan. Yeah. Added to that, anyone who's ever publicly spoke out against bonded labor, it puts a target on your back. So anyone who's done that publicly from within Pakistan has either disappeared or been killed. And we take the safety of our staff as seriously as the safety of the kids in our care. And so you've got to be incredibly wise how you go about things. And so in Pakistan, for example, we don't operate under the name One by One, just because One by One is so vocal about tackling slavery, but also the fact that we're a Christian organization. Yeah. And so we operate under a different name in Pakistan, and we're very careful with who we connect with there in order to keep staff safe. Then, for example, in Uganda, we've got great relationships with the local police. So we've been able to do a lot of training with the local police, because there was previously an issue of girls actually being arrested as prostitutes when actually they were victims of sex trafficking. And so we do a lot of training with the police, also around just interview techniques, because if you're dealing with a child that's been traumatized, firstly, there's parts of what they've gone through that they won't necessarily remember at all, or they may remember things in a different order. Now, ordinarily, to a police officer, that could be an indication of somebody lying, making up stories. But actually, if they're aware of the impact of trauma on the brain, especially in a child, in anybody traumatized, especially in a child, it's important that they recognize the impact trauma makes, and therefore how to interview a child without re-traumatizing them. And so we've had great receptions there. But no matter where you are, you're going to deal with a level of corruption, sometimes at the ground level, the granular level, and then sometimes right up to the very highest ranks of the people with the big powers in government. And it's sad to work with that. That's where I think I get most angry, because I'm like, you're in a position to bring change and to make such a good impact, and you're using that for your own gain, to line your own pockets, or, that's where I struggle. But you have to work wherever you can. You've got to work with the local community and all that entails, local government, local police, and just build up those trust relationships, because for every rotten apple, there's a good one, and so you've just got to work with the people you can and begin to build up those trust levels. Otherwise, you're not going to see a long-term national change if you just me, myself, and I in my little corner. You've got to work with the whole community wherever that's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Becky, is there a story that stands out to you in terms of, obviously you don't have to use a name or anything, but just, is there a story that has really touched you and marked you and kind of stuck with you through these years? Because I imagine that the work is challenging. Mm-hmm. It's, you're really on the front lines of very, very dark things, and confronted with that. And so you may not always see the immediate victory in every situation, and it might feel hopeless at times or just discouraging at times. But I'm just curious if there's a story that really stands out that is a kind of an anchor for you, that's been an encouragement and a blessing.
Yeah, so I'll bring two little stories because they sort of connect. The first one was the most challenging one. So it was a little girl born into bonded labor in Pakistan. When we talk about children publicly, we never reveal their real name because we want to protect the family's identity, but also we don't want it to define that child forever moving forward.
Yeah.
And so there was a little girl in Pakistan who was 3 years old when she was raped. She was 3. And sadly, she didn't survive the rape. She died as a result. But then because she's just a girl and because she's just a slave, she was left on the floor for people to walk past in this brick factory as if she was just a piece of trash. And my team rang me in Pakistan, distraught about this, obviously. And so we began to work with Mercy's mom, who's still in that brick factory. As a result of that story, we actually ended up doubling the work that we were doing in Pakistan. But Mercy's story always stayed with me. Well, fast forward a few years ago, we started working in Uganda, purely doing prevention work. That was the plan. And all of a sudden, the police began to contact us and say, we're starting to identify these kids, but we don't know where to put them. There's no safe place to put them while we try and find their families. They had one little girl who was 6, who for 2 years had been in sex trafficking. She didn't even know the name of her family, let alone the village. And so the only safe place they had for her was a police cell. And so they said, we need a centre for these kids. And so there was only one name for our centre in Uganda, and that was the Mercy Centre. 1, in honour of the little girl in Pakistan, but 2, to prevent other little girls having to go through what Mercy ever went through. So we opened the Mercy Centre last May. And in December last year, I had the joy of going over there and being present for a particular little girl. So there was a 10-year-old named Deborah who last July, she was sex trafficked. And her trafficker, after using her as much as he wanted, he then, I hope this is not too much information, I'm so sorry if it is, but her trafficker then strangled her and shoved her body into a sugar sack and left on a sugar plantation, thinking she was dead. And off he ran with all the money. Thankfully, a passerby was walking by and saw this sugar sack moving by itself, and they actually thought an animal had got stuck inside. So they went over to release what they thought was going to be a dog or a goat or something, and to their horror, 10-year-old little Deborah was inside. Well, she got taken straight to the hospital and the police met her there. And once she was ready for discharge, she was brought by the police straight to our Mercy Centre. And when she first moved in, she was very shut down. She was very closed off. She was very quiet and timid, and understandably so.
Yeah.
But over time, she began to realize these staff don't want to hurt her or take anything from her. They're here to support her and love her. And once she started to feel safe, the healing began to take place. Added to that, our team were able to work with the police so that we actually got the guy's now in jail serving time. He was prosecuted, which doesn't happen in many scenarios.
Yeah, wow.
In Deborah's, it did.
Wow.
But by the time I'm there in December, this little girl, had I not read her whole case file, I would have never realized it was the same girl, because the girl I encountered in December was vastly different from the girl who joined us in the July. She was bubbly and happy. She couldn't wait to show me this dance that she choreographed with her friends in the Mercy Centre. And then I had the honour of going with the social worker and all the local leaders to help take her back home to her village. And watching her run into her mother's arms was beyond powerful and beautiful.
Wow.
But the beauty of it all was it brought me back to a moment that I've carried for 2 decades. You see, that very first child, the 9-year-old in Sierra Leone, back then there was no safe house, there was no social workers working for us, and I had to leave that little girl on the streets that day. And I've carried that for 2 decades of did I do enough in that situation? But all of a sudden, I'm stood in Uganda in December, and it was obviously Deborah's story, very different, 2 different girls. But there was this moment of redemption of what started in Sierra Leone, where I wasn't enough and didn't have the answers. Because of that situation, my very weakness is now the platform from which we serve. And because of her, we're now able to see girls like Deborah go home. And over these last few months, of the 75 girls that have come into the Mercy Centre, we've managed to reintegrate more than 50 of them back home with their biological families, which is just amazing. And over 90% of them have gone back into family-centred care of some sort.
Wow. Oh my gosh. These stories are hard to even fathom, honestly. And Becky, what is your charge or call to the church as a whole, the body of Christ, when we see these issues, when we hear about these problems, what would you say as a whole to the body of Christ?
That it's going to take all hands on deck to bring down the Goliath of slavery. And so whether it's a faithful old lady in her prayer closet, she can do so much on her knees that we need those prayers for our staff and for our kids. We desperately need an army of people praying for us. Secondly, we take people out on missions trips with us. Come be a part of it firsthand. Come and be a part of the Dignity Project training, where we go into schools or refugee camps and train to safeguard other girls from ever going into it.
Yeah.
Or people can donate if they want to give a one-off donation towards it, or a monthly donation they can give towards it. There's so many ways people can be a part of it.
Yeah.
And then for churches particularly, we've written a resource called Churches Against Trafficking, that churches can download it for free off our website. They can be a part of this, because the reality is trafficking's not just going off in Africa and Asia. It's on our doorsteps too.
That's right.
And sometimes the same people that traffickers are trying to target, the vulnerable, the marginalized, are the same people that we as the church are called to reach out to in our own communities in order to reach them with love. And so the question would be, who's going to knock on their door first? Will it be the trafficker, or will it be the Christian?
Wow. So good, Becky. One of the things that I'm reminded of as I'm hearing you say this is that when in 2017, when the Lord kind of first gave me the vision for United Hive and some of the ministry stuff that we're doing, one of the things and why we called it United Hive was that the Lord actually showed me. I was at a restaurant, I look up at this wall and I see this beehive sculpture, and I had seen it many times, but I had never really had I never thought anything else about it. But I'm looking at this sculpture, and all of a sudden the sculpture, I saw this gray, massive beehive that was like gray, but there was no activity. And I heard the Holy Spirit say, the church is a dormant hive. And then all of a sudden I saw this image switch, and I saw this beehive that was just teeming with activity. So many bees going, and just everywhere, so many bees. And the Lord began, as I did more research about honeybees and this process of making honey, the Lord began to speak about bees and the things that I learned. And one of the things I realized is, of course, every bee has a mission. Every bee has an assignment. There's not like, 10% of the bees are working hard and they're flying around, they're helping the pollination, they're grabbing pollen and they're doing their thing. And there's a couple others that are like responsible for making honey, but the rest of them are just like chilling and just sitting around doing nothing. That's not how this is supposed to work. And so you may be listening to this and you may not know what you're called to. And your calling, I have United Hive, we build, we have an app, we do lots of different things with evangelism and with revival. That's what I feel called to. Becky has her calling, and your calling may be very different than either one of us. But I believe that God, you can step in. Every believer can step in and be a part of something. And like Becky said, it's so important to recognize, I believe that those that are giving, those that are praying, is just as important spiritually, how God views this, because we're all meant to work together. And so if you are not able to go beyond the front lines in Uganda or Pakistan, that's okay. But what can you do? What can you do to support One by One, the Dignity Project, what Becky's doing? That's, I think, the question. And Christians, in my view, we've become, of course, this is a very general statement, but so many Christians, we look at the problems of the world and we're very fatalistic about it. It's a little bit like, there's a lot of darkness and the enemy's winning this war, and what can we do? And it's true that there is so much darkness, but what I believe is there's not a single problem on the planet today that God's heart is not wanting to break into, and there's nothing happening in our planet today that is too far gone for God to reform, to touch, to transform. But he uses us. He uses us as his hands and feet. And so we have to be able to say yes. We have to be able to go and to not be afraid to go into these dark places. So Becky, I just commend you in the highest way for just saying yes to this. I know it's been, this is a couple decade journey for you. Like this is like your life. You've spent your life doing this and building this. And so the final question for you, Becky, what is next for One by One? What's the wildest dream that God's put in your heart? What do you want to see in the coming years?
Twofold. Firstly, I would love to see multiple mercy centers. Like even already now, the need is greater than our capacity. And so I'd love to open up a second or a third or a fourth mercy center. Yeah. And then on the prevention side, it took us 10 years to reach 50,000 girls. And so my challenge that I've put out to our team is, okay, then in that case, in the next 5 years, can we reach up to the 100,000? So do it in double the time.
Come on.
And so they're the two big prayer points for me of, can we double our prevention work within the next 5 years? And can we open several more mercy centers? So if you know any billionaires or millionaires, send them my way. I've got loads so that they can be a part of.
And you know what, Becky, it's such an important thing, because I've been praying and asking the Lord. I believe God in this time, as he is raising up, I'll speak just from my perspective of sort of revival or evangelism, as I believe God is raising up missionaries and evangelists and people to touch every city around the planet. God is also, I believe, raising up a new generation of kingdom funders who are not just wealthy Christians. There's a lot of wealthy Christians, and I give my 10%. And maybe that 10% is a lot of money. So they're giving their money. But at the end of the day, they still don't have the perspective and the heart that their wealth is for the kingdom. Their wealth is not first and foremost so that they can have, 50 mansions and 50 jets and whatever number of Lamborghinis that they want. It's the issue. It's a heart issue. It's not whether it's evil to have a Lamborghini. It's a heart thing. It's a priority thing. But I am praying and believing for God to raise up radical kingdom billionaires, because these issues, they take money, they take funding, and it's not just staff. Like, you have to have the infrastructure, you have to have buildings. And even, unfortunately, the way our world works, even to get into some of these countries, you have to have money to pay or to be influential in that culture, in that, even among the government. I mean, I'm imagining that it's not always in some of these countries, to get permits, to build, to have an organization there, right? Like, you have to know people, you have to have relationships, you have to have funding. So these are things that we need in the body of Christ. And we see billionaires in the world that are funding all sorts of evil around our planet today. Where are the radical kingdom funders of our day? And I believe that God is raising them up, and we're going to see funding for some of these really big visions, because the need is so great. And even with even in your wildest imagination of what is possible or what you want your team to do, I would say, the need is probably 100x even what you're thinking. And that's the crazy part. And when I think about evangelism, I think about, man, we need full-time evangelists in every city. We need focused, intentional people that are reaching the lost and making disciples. And then, of course, all the unique projects like what you're doing and all the various other ways that God wants to move on the planet. We need people that can focus to do that, but they need funding. And so I am praying just big prayers for this right now. Becky and I'll partner and just be praying for you guys, that there's breakthrough in a new way to where money is not where it's not the question of how do we get the money for this? It's more the question of how do we find the right people that have the heart to actually join it. We got the money. That would be awesome to say, hey, we got all the money we need, That would be
awesome to say.
So that's my prayer. Now with that, how can people connect with you? How can they support practically anything that you want to share? I know you've written a book, so just practically, what can people do to get a hold of you or to connect more?
So they can go to the website, which is onebyone.org, and it's the spelling of the word ONEBYONE, as opposed to the numerical. So they can go to the website. There's loads of information on there. They can email us from there. They can get in touch about coming on a trip with us from there. They can sign up to donate from there. If they wanted to buy the book, they can do that from there too.
Awesome. Okay.
And then on top of that, if they wanted to go to socials, we're on all the usual: Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. They can connect with us to see more live what's happening today. And so the social media is a great place to check out one by one to see everything that's happening.
Awesome. Becky, I'm again so thankful for your time. Thank you for your work. I'm going to be praying more about this as well. And I'm believing for multiple mercy centers around the planet. We need that. So, but thank you for saying yes and what you're doing. So,
pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay, we'll see you soon. Thanks for tuning in to the Contagious Faith Podcast. If this episode encouraged you, share it with a friend, leave a review, and don't forget, download the United Hive app today, where your faith becomes contagious.